Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away. When I close my eyes, I can see your face, and an ocean of love washes over me, and I am in your presence. Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away. When I hear your voice, the power of your word, oceans of peace flood right through my heart. I live for you, and I embrace your holiness. Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away. Carry me away, lift me from this place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away. This place, ease my burdens, Lord. Take me to your world, let me see your face, carry me away.
Hello and welcome to another SDA Q&A. I'm your host for today, Peter Dixon, and my very special guest is James from AcademyApologia. Did I pronounce that correctly, James? And welcome to the
Yes, you
show.
did. Thank you.
Hey, we'll get right into it. And thank you, everyone that's joining us and watching. Sorry we're a little bit delayed, but it's all good. We're here now. Now, I stumbled across James's YouTube channel maybe 12 months ago, Academy Apologia. How long have you had that channel going, James?
I've probably had the channel going about 7 years, but it's been about the last two, maybe just a little over 2 years that I've been making predominantly Adventist type videos.
And I think that's how I stumbled across you when I started the season 2 here at SDAQ&A, and during lockdown, the first lockdown, um, just searching for information on Adventist material. I would have been typing into YouTube Seventh Day
Mhm.
Adventist, and your channel came up, and you cover all sorts of topics, but you do have this series, Defeating Adventism. And when I watched, your first few programs, and I think I've watched almost all of them now. How many have you got on Defeating Adventism? Well over 30, is it, or 40?
I've got 50
Yeah,
published and four in the can right now
yeah.
that are scheduled for release. So yeah.
And I think I started watching around 19 or 20, and then went back and then have watched many,
hmm
if not all of them. And it struck me, boy, I thought this guy has got a huge knowledge base on Adventism. And so my first question today is to ask you, how did you stumble across Adventism? You're not an Adventist, but how did you accrue such a wealth of knowledge about the Adventist movement?
So I actually I became a Christian in 1990. And it was about that time I started studying Jehovah Witnesses. I was challenged by them. They knocked on my door like they probably have so many others, listening. And they challenged me and they challenged my faith. And I had absolutely nothing to say. And I was completely embarrassed by that fact and said to myself, um, I've got to change that. And I got to change it now. And I started studying. I said, I think Jehovah Witnesses are wrong, but I can't prove anything, and that doesn't mean anything if you can't prove it to me. I can't even prove what I believe. I can't even disprove or prove what they believe. So that embarked me on the study. Now, on the study of Jehovah Witnesses, it gets me to the Second Day Adventist because the founder of Jehovah Witnesses was an ardent follower, an advocate of Second Day Adventism, William Miller and that whole movement, 1844. So that got me my introduction 30 years ago. And I never really studied Adventism much then, though I was very familiar with the founders, not so much in detail, in name and some of the key points. Um, but as my studies progressed in other groups, and that could be Campbellites, that could be Christadelphians, Christian Science, Mormonism, all starting about the same time, and in a lot of cases in the same region. Um, I started acquiring a little more knowledge. Now, what really started me with studying Adventism, honestly, I can't tell you. It happened about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. Actually, I spend most of my time dialoguing Muslims and Islam. I've got a master's degree in philosophy and religion where I wrote my master's thesis on English translations of the Quran. I study intently the Muslim faith. But it was about 2 years ago that I just started dialoguing Seventh Day Adventist on YouTube. I had no intent on making videos at the time, um, but I just started dialoguing them because the primary reason was this: there there's a lot of YouTube channels that have videos about Jehovah Witnesses or Mormons. Period. I mean, you can stumble across those rather easily. There's not a lot about Seventh Day Adventism and Seventh Day Adventist, and I said to myself, I go, there's a hole here, and there's a hole that I think that needs to be patched, and I think there's information that needs to be shared about some of the things that I was learning, and really what started me on this, and pretty much is what kept me on it, even though I still dialogue and study the other groups. And you'll see in my videos, I occasionally make videos on those other groups, but I primarily focus on the Seventh-day Adventist religion.
It's interesting because you have quite a unique audience in many ways. Because, as you say, even for myself, in the last 2 years, exploring the content that's out there on Adventism, having left the church myself, but still am very much connected with my friends and family that are Adventists. Um, I noticed there wasn't a lot of material out there that was kind of speaking from an objective outsider's view. There were lots of former Adventists, disgruntled Adventists, speaking against Adventism. There were a lot of people speaking in support of Adventism. But you're speaking as an outsider, um, content that is perhaps linked and matching to the former Adventist um, content in some ways, but you're speaking from someone that's largely unbiased, and that's why I find your information very unique. Um, can you tell me when your very first episode from memory on defeating Adventism is about Ellen White's first vision and the shut door vision? I think it's a two-part program. Is that right? I'm pretty sure that.
No, my very first Adventist video was on Ellen White's quote on amalgamation
Oh
that she
yes,
made.
yeah, yeah.
And that wasn't even titled Defeating Advent. I didn't even start that series. And I did, my first one was the amalgamation. That was followed by 2 or 3 videos. And, and then as I was doing my research and looking at, uh, I've downloaded and you can see the backdrop when I do my videos, not necessarily here when I do my videos, I'm in my library. And, and I started as I'm doing my research, I came to an understanding of how Adventism defines the gospel message. And I remember when I made that first video, it was I don't know, it was like 90 minutes long, and I thought, oh, that's just way too long. That's ridiculous. I got to break this down. And then it was at that time when I broke it into the 4 pieces. That's when the whole defeating Adventism series came to my mind. I thought, this is a series I'm doing here, a series on the gospel, and and so that's just how I titled it. Now, one thing you'll notice in my videos that I actually learned this, and I think it's a great lesson I learned from talking to my Jehovah Witness friends. My Jehovah Witness friends, when I've been, like I said, I've been dialoguing them for 30 years. I go on the street and go find them on Saturday mornings as they're standing out in front of businesses, establishments with their watchtowers in front of them, and I go engage them. And anybody that, like myself, that does this, talking to a Jehovah Witness, if you say something and you're quoting their literature, you absolutely have to have original literature. They do not they look with high suspicion at any photocopies or any quotations in books, etc. They just don't accept anything but original literature. So that embarked me on my course of obtaining original literature, and I have been on that road for 30 years. Well, I do the same thing in Adventism.
That's right. I've
I
noticed.
I too don't trust books by authors, and I don't want an author to read some quote in some magazine and then tell me what it means. I want the magazine. I want the book. I want to see what it means. And so you'll notice in a lot of my videos, that's what it is. That's what I'm showing. I am showing you the actual books, or in a lot of cases, the Advent Review and Herald magazines that I downloaded from the official archived website. So I want to say that's one probably aspect that I think is unique about what I'm doing is I'm showing in a very visual sense from just my own poor photography as I show the actual books that I use. Here they are. So when I say something, it's backed up by the actual book, and the viewer can see that.
Yes, that's great. Because one thing I know, and I interviewed Dr. William G. Johnson, is still alive. I think he's 89, 90 now. Interviewed him about 18 months ago as the first of season 2. We were talking about Des Ford and Glacier View and that whole era where he was very
Mhm.
much involved with the church at that time. 79, 80, 81. And in 84, he was interviewed on the John Ankerberg show and
Hmm.
with Walter Martin. And
Yes.
you know a lot about questions on doctrine, and I'd love to dig into that at some point with you as well. But he was constantly, when they were asking him some hard questions about some of these original documents you're talking about, he would constantly refer back to the 27 fundamentals. I think they were at the time,
Hmm.
maybe a
Yes.
bit less, and now I think they're 28. Um, and what I've noticed is that yes, you can refer to this kind of almost homogenized collection of fundamental beliefs, but I've noticed over since 1984 to now that those fundamental belief statements have kind of been watered down and watered down. So I like that you're referring to key source documents, and not just going to the statement of beliefs, because to be honest, sometimes the statements of beliefs, any Christian could read them and go, yeah, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
Have
Yeah.
you
Absolutely.
have you noticed a watering down of the statements, the fundamental beliefs, or have you not really looked
I
into that?
No, I have in my research, because as I look at the Review and Herald magazines, when there are general conference sessions, those general conference sessions, um, in recent decades, are always published in the Review and Herald magazines. And then in those magazines, they usually publish a portion of the conversations that are taking place between the general conference members. And often in those, I see a running dialogue where they are debating words they want to put in or take out of the beliefs. And so, yeah, absolutely, I've noticed a changing. I now why that influence is taking place, don't know, but I do see that too.
Yeah, yeah. And I this morning I was listening to you comparing some of the early writings version of Ellen White's first vision with
Right.
later editions. And I thought today, like in some ways, I want today's interview to be a little bit of an overview. I'd love to get you back where we actually pick one topic and drill down on that topic. But
Hmm.
today I just wanted to kind of have an introductory kind of conversation with you and to just touch on some points. What I've noticed with Adventist apologists is they're very good at allaying the church membership's fears. And so, for example, you mentioned amalgamation of man and beast. You have a half an hour conversation with an Adventist apologist that's really good at what they do. And after you half an hour, you go, oh, phew, okay, nothing to see here,
Hmm.
moving on. And pre social media, I remember many times the big wigs would come to your church or your local conference. There'd be a big meeting, and you could almost feel the rumblings of discontent. And by the end of the meeting, everyone's going, "Oh, phew, okay, everything's okay."
Right.
And so I'm keen to kind of gently raise some of these topics into the community of Adventists that I know watches and listens to SDAQ&A. But I thought let's touch on that first vision, and I'd like you to outline it a little bit and share some of the changes you saw coming in over the years,
Hmm.
and also, I'd like you to touch on the shut door um, uh, teaching that came out of that first vision as well. And perhaps, in your view, outline what is the nutshell Adventism from 1844 as it became a formal denomination in the early 1860s. What were they really saying during that time period that the overtones continue on to this day, regardless of people knowing that they're there or not?
Right. So, when there was just an interesting aspect. I'm kind of looking away here at a slide that I have, of the first vision. Now, I want to relate that. What made me actually study it was, like I said, I studied lots of religions, and Mormonism is one of those religions. There is a huge controversy in Mormonism about Joseph Smith's first vision. So I thought to myself, I wonder if there's any controversy surrounding Ellen White's first vision, as there was with Joseph Smith. And so I started looking into her first vision as it was published. And I don't have my book in front of me, but it's the 1882 early writings that I have and that I show in my video. It's Defeating Adventism number 25 is where that one is. And I see it published, and I'm reading. And that's another thing I do too with with my books is I actually read them. And I'm reading early writings, and I'm reading the preface. And I remember one part of the preface that I read was, actually I remember why early writings in 1882 was published, and it was originally published for detractors at that time about Miss White's visions. And there were charges by detractors that some of her visions were not accessible, were being hidden, were etc. And so the church, in her defense, said, okay, we're going to answer you detractors, we're going to publish this book. And that's why we have early writings in 1882. And so when I read the preface of the book, so I knew that going into it, why the book was published, and I read the preface. And I remember one part of the preface, there was a declaration stating, "We have changed nothing." And I thought, okay, that's a pretty emphatic statement. Well, then I started studying the first vision and found out the first vision was actually published, Ellen White's first vision, in a Daystar newspaper. And in that Daystar, it's January 24th, 1846. And the whole vision is there. And I was able to hunt down and find an actual photograph of the original Daystar newspaper. And again, you can see that in the video.
And what year was that released again?
It was January 24th, 1846.
Wow.
So again, I'm able to find it, and they introduced, this vision by Miss White, and you can read the vision and have early writings from 1882 open right in front of you, and you can look at the words and go, yeah, I see them. They're tracking. I get to this one paragraph and it stops. There's like 39. Let me get my count right. Yeah, 39 words were taken out of the first vision as it was published again in 1882. So the first vision in the newspaper has 39 extra words that are not in the 1882 book that told me we didn't change anything. And so I start examining those words and I go, okay, what are these words? And the words really are kind of, as you said earlier, they relate back to the shut door doctrine. And what that is in a nutshell, maybe for those that don't know, is that after the Great Disappointment, there was a thought for some time by the Adventist community that the door to salvation was shut. It was closed. No one else was going to be saved. There's salvation for none at that point. That's why it was called the shut door, because the door to salvation was indeed shut. And that's what those missing 39 words have to deal with. It's talking about, in essence, it doesn't use the words, but the doctrine that comes out of those missing 39 words, and it's talking about the shut door doctrine. Now that doctrine, I think there's some dispute as to when it was actually laid aside or done with, and I believe that one date bantered around is about 1851. It was believed up until that time, but the Adventists, whether it's the late 1840s, early 1850s, the Adventist community at that time was running into some problems. And the problems were, after 1844, if the door to salvation is shut, what if you get new converts?
Yeah.
Or what if, Joe and Susie, second day Adventist, now have a baby, and it's 1845. Adventist doctrine says my baby there's no hope, there's no salvation. So for both new converts and those that are having children, it presented a problem. And as the years go on, then the community saw that, and that's when I think that doctrine was laid aside.
Isn't it
But
interesting?
nonetheless, Oh, yeah,
Sorry
go
to
ahead.
interrupt, but isn't that interesting? That demonstrates how soon after 1844 they were expecting that return. They
Oh, yeah.
they genuinely were thinking this is weeks or maximum months away.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't even think about converts coming.
Yeah,
Sorry to interrupt. I
absolutely.
just wanted
No,
to
no, no,
highlight
no,
that.
but
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. I mean, and what you said is so true. It just captures you can say the intensity. I'm sure it was just palpable for all members present at that time. What had led up to it. The day comes, and it's expectations are not met, and there was course thinking that, well, it's still going to happen soon. Maybe we're off just a little bit, etc. All these ideas were floating around at the time, but the shut door doctrine was real, and it was advocated by all the members at that time, and if Ellen White had a vision of it, well, that lent at least in the Second Day Adventist community at that mind, the newly forming Seventh Day Adventists, that lended a lot of credibility to it because this is supposed to be a vision from the spirit of prophecy.
Mm.
So I thought it was kind of a big deal when I saw that those 39 words were extracted out
And
of
you're
the
and you're
early
suggesting
writings.
that those 39 words,
Hmm.
like if you read that original copy that you'd found, would
Hmm.
you get a sense if you left in those 39 words that this shut door teaching was quite clear, but then when you read the 1882 version and those 39 words are removed, even though they've said nothing's been removed, you can understand people tweaking a few words here and there to get
Sure.
the grammar corrected. But
Hmm.
are you suggesting that when you reread the 18.2 version, that you all of a sudden don't really get a sense that they were preaching the shut door in the earlier version?
Right. Because the missing 39 words, the part of the vision has to do with seeing seeing some individuals on a path going to heaven. And some of these people were falling off this path, never to return. And there's your shut door doctrine.
Mm,
There's no hope for you.
mm,
And like I said, it doesn't say shut door doctrine, but
no.
the missing words themselves are the implication is there would be those who would fall off of this path, never ever to return, and those that were on it would just keep going and it would advance to heaven. And so that's the gist of those missing
And
words.
Ellen White later said, "Yes, I did subscribe to that view of a shut door. So
Yes.
we're not reading into that interpretation. That is something that she said, yes, I did early on." She didn't say her. She said, yes, some of us in the early days did believe that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's right. You can still find that in the magazines too. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Can you unpack some of those 39 words that indicate the clarity of the, the
I
difference?
can actually read off
Yeah,
the exact
that'd be
words,
great.
and they are, and I'm quoting right now. It was just as impossible for them to get on the path again and go to the city, as all the wicked world which God had rejected. They fell all the way along the path, one after another, until, and then the sentence continues, but those are the exact words that are missing from when I compared the Daystar to the 1882 early writings. So there was those that were on the path, fell off. And to the Adventist mind at that time, they knew that meant that's the shut door doctrine because there's going to be people who salvation is not going to be available to them.
Mm, mm. Are there other paragraphs you can read to us that show the comparison there? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, 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 that's good.
And people can go. I'll just put up again the link to your website. People can just simply search AcademyApologia
Hmm.
and can find the which. Do you know which number you're dealing with on this part
That
two?
was number 20. This is all that we're talking about here is on
Yes,
number 25.
25. Great.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
people can go and find a bit more in depth.
Yeah, but and also for those of you if you're checking my sources, and I encourage everybody to check my sources. Check me out. Keep me on the straight path. I'm using early writings, 1882, second edition. And here's something you'll find that's different. If you go to the White Estate website, which we all can do today, and download a PDF version of this book, the page numberings that you will see on my video will not match the book that you download, because the original book, it's kind of odd for a book. It'll have the first, and I don't remember how many it is, like 50 pages. And then it starts numbering again, 1 through like 40. And then it starts numbering again. And then it goes 1 through the end. So if I cite page 11, this book actually has 3 page 11s, or 3 page 12s, etc. So some of my citations may be different if you're using a PDF version
Right.
of the book.
Right.
But yeah, the book itself, and I'm looking at it, it is page 11 in early writings dated 1882, and the vision by Miss White is talking about the light. The light beheld behind them went out, which left their feet in perfect darkness, and they stumbled and got their eyes off the mark and lost sight of Jesus, and fell off the path down into the dark and wicked world below. And then then that leads into, the original vision reads, and here's the missing words again. It was just as impossible. Once they fell off, it was impossible for them to get on the path again and go into the city, as all the wicked world which God had rejected. See, God had already, that's it right there. It's the solid line, the stake in the ground. God had already rejected them, period. That's, I want to say, code for, that's the shut door.
Yeah.
And no more salvation is possible at that point.
What's fascinating to me, and I want to dig into 2 things here, but one, if we'd come to early 1845 and Christ returned, we'd all be in heaven now going, oh yeah, there was this last minute kind of thing, and that
Right.
turned out to be quite true. And yes, we did have that last minute where we had to kind of keep the commandments and be ready for Jesus. Let's be ready for Jesus. They weren't digging in too deeply at that point what it meant to be ready. However, that didn't occur. And so that makes me think, well, how does that fit in when you then compare that doctrine of being ready for Jesus, he's coming any minute, as a whole new facet that's an end time special message for the world, that now after 170 plus years suddenly looks different. If Christ had come back in 1845 or earlier, it would have made sense. But then you have to kind of fit that whole doctrine back into the gospel.
Right.
So I can see if Christ returned early, it would be fine. But because he didn't, all of a sudden you've got to then make that round peg fit into the square hole. And
Yes.
what are your thoughts on that before I touch on the next point I want to dig into?
So what I see in Adventist literature, well, let me tell you something else. I have a sort of, I'll call it a personal project I'm working on. Um, I bring in a lot of what I learned studying all the other groups that I've already mentioned have been extraordinarily helpful here for me in bringing them into Adventism, because I see Christian apologetics and Seventh-day Adventism lacking a little bit. And so that's fine. I can bring in some things. I'm just going to grab a book here that I use as a model. I have it on my computer desk. It's actually about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and this book, gosh, it's got to be like early 90s, something like that. 1990, old book. This book here, you can see the title, Index to Watchtower Errors. And what it is there were 2 gentlemen that did some research of the book, and they were reading Watchtower magazines and Watchtower books and highlighting some of the doctrinal issues that they would discover in those magazines and books. And I thought that's a great model. I like that model. So I have my own index to Adventist errors. And my index now, I got a Microsoft Word file. It's about 255 pages of some quotes I think some current and former Adventists would be very familiar with, but I got many quotes that I know nobody is familiar with. And some of that makes its way into some of my videos. Some of the quotes that I use is original research that I'm conducting to do that. So in that vein, back to what you said, and what I see regard to shut door and all the excitement, I did a search on probation, because I found the concept of probation to be a fascinating concept for me, because
Yeah.
No one else has anything like that, and all the other religions I mentioned. So I understand. Adventist, you're on probation. Great. I understand what probation means. I know when your probation starts. I know when your probation ends. And so I was doing some for my index on probation. And what I noted, and this is directly to your point, I kept seeing as I have by the way, I got 7,799 Advent Review magazines in PDF form. That's all I can get off the archive site. And I'm able to search them all. And I search them all the time. And when I did my search for probation in those magazines, I kept seeing this. I mean, even the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, this intensity. Probation's almost over. Get ready. And 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 finally, I ended up, because I have a heading in my index about probation. I had to make another subheading called the imminent return of probation because I saw so much of this just constant buildup that I think, back to what you're saying, is this leftover buildup from the expectation of 1844. And it was carrying over clearly into the 40s, 50s, 70s, etc. Talking about probation's almost over. And so I still see it today, actually, in the
Yeah,
magazines. So yeah, it's still
yeah.
there.
When you then look at say that there's an important 7-year period that follows 1844, where Joseph Bates, I think, was kind of pushing this theory the most, that
Yes.
after the 7 years, people see the 7 as an important number. 1851, it's going to happen then. And even Ellen White in Vision, I think, I might be wrong, but there was a definite implication that, yep, that's when it's going to happen. There was no official date setting like before, but there was strong suggestion that this is going to be when it happens. So again, it doesn't happen. If you lived in that period, 1844 to 1851, you could extrapolate during that time, if we were there, that, hey, well, look, maybe it hasn't happened. We might have got the shut door a bit wrong. Let's look at what it means to be ready and still hold out hope that Lord's coming back, probation will close, we have to stand without an intercessor. All of that stuff kind of makes sense. But after 1851, I noticed all of a sudden, wow, we've lots of extra explanations coming into why the Lord hadn't returned. And one of the things
Hmm.
I've noticed that was strongly had begun to be taught was that the Lord hasn't come back because you haven't been following the three angels' messages correctly. You haven't been keeping the commandments. It's because you Adventists have not been good Adventists that the Lord hasn't returned. And I think we call that nowadays last generation theology, which is now rearing its head again within Adventism, where people are feeling like, boy, if we were truly following the message of Adventism, the Lord would return, and hallelujah, he might return in our generation if we do it now. Have you noticed that? And can you speak into the early days of last generation theology, which I think is part of the DNA of Adventism? And
Yes.
when the liberal progressive Adventists see it now, they go, oh, no, this is an aberration. It cannot be found in early Adventism. But I'm suggesting that it is definitely there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it is definitely there. And I'm going to refer your audience to my Defeating Adventism number 17. And in that, you're going to see so we're talking about, right, you said 1851, right? And between 1844 and 1851. And you're right, a lot of fervor taking place, formative doctrines, etc. One of those, and that's what I did this video on, again, so I'm using the same book, Early Writings from 1882, is a prophecy, not prophecy, I'll call it's a vision by Ellen White. And the name of it's on page 54. So again, I'm using 54 in original. It's probably 2 or 3 page 54s in the book if you're looking at a PDF. The title, though, of the section, which you can find, this vision, is called Mark of the Beast. In this section is a vision given by Miss White in June 27th, 1850. So here we are, right in that time frame you're talking about, right? 1844 to 1851. And in this vision, she is projecting, we only have a matter of months. Hurry, hurry, hurry. As she said, her angel said to her. Actually, the angel said to her, "Get ready, get ready, get ready." And that's in the very first paragraph. Oops, you're on mute there, Peter.
Sorry, am I back?
There we go.
Sorry, well, I
Yes,
missed the year there. What was the year again?
1850.
Yes.
So it's June of 1850. And again, it's in the section. For those of you that have early writings, you'll find a section called Mark of the Beast, chapter title. And so it's said the angel. I'm reading right now, right off the page. Said the angel, get ready, get ready, get ready. And then in this vision, just a little later on, she's talking about that there's those that are coming into the faith. They only have a matter of months to learn what we learned in years.
Yes.
So that kind of it sets it's a soft expectation, but an expectation of months, whatever
Yeah.
months means, 2, 3, 4, 5,
Yeah.
etc. But she did, you're right. She set that expectation of
Yeah.
months. Well, of course, we know the Lord did not return in months. It's been over 2,000 months since that vision was given. So what happened then? Yeah, and you'll see this in the video, was in 1868 in Testimonies for the Church, Volume 2, and I'm looking at pages 194 in particular, but actually it starts on page 183. And this is what she writes in Testimonies: the long night of gloom is trying, but the morning is deferred in mercy. So see, now Ellen White is saying, well, the coming's not happening because the Lord is deferring it. He's waiting. You can then take that, and then we can go to 31 years later, 1899. This is in Testimonies, Volume 6. And this is getting right to what you said earlier, Peter. And I'm looking at page 450 in that volume. And it said, had the purpose of God been carried out by his people in giving to the world the message of mercy, Christ would, ere this, have come to earth, and the saints would have received their welcome in the city of God. And so when I read that, I thought, you see, it's you Seventh-day Adventists. You guys weren't doing what you were supposed to do, and therefore the Lord didn't come. So I go back from this 1850, to the 1868, where the Lord deferred it, to 1899. It's the problem is you.
Yes.
And the larger Seventh-day Adventist body, that is. And you're right. I think that, and which is not, which is peculiar, because I see that same thing happen in all the other religions that I study.
Yeah.
I can give you a perfect example. Some of you in this room may have heard the 1975 prophecy by Jehovah's Witnesses. The world was going to end in 1975. Jehovah's Witnesses got a lot of dates. 1975 is just one. And they published it in their literature. But you know what Jehovah's Witnesses said in later publications? They said, oh, no, we never published that. It's the people got all excited. It wasn't us, the leadership. It was you, the followers. And it said, and so when I read this in Testimonies, that 1975 Jehovah's Witness thing just instantly came to mind. I thought, it's just the same thing.
Mm.
They're just doing the same thing in terms of the
Yeah.
leadership.
Yeah.
They're blaming the followers.
Yes. And it's interesting as you go then from 1851 up to when they became an official, the Seventh-day Adventist Church movement, with the name and everything registered, or whatever they did back
Mm-hmm.
then. I think that was, correct me if I'm wrong, 1863-ish.
63, yes, yeah.
That period is a very interesting period, because they're trying to kind of uncover some of the potential mistakes, shift the blame, deal with people, the growing interest in it and wanting to formalize it. What are
Yes.
some of the reasons you think that they headed towards a formal church when people like James White were so opposed to it in the early days? They didn't want to be
Yeah.
seen as a movement or a religion or
No, you're right. They
denomination.
didn't. They don't. And of course everybody here knows already. There's no creed, right? We're not going to do that or say that. Um, but yeah, there is a creed, I guess. I mean, to me, there is. It's called, and here's the 28 Beliefs book. I mean, that's a statement of beliefs. But you're right. I understand they didn't want to do that. Again, I see the same parallel in other groups. And so when I hear that, I think of Alexander and Thomas Campbell, the Campbellites, who started their movement in the early 1800s, I think about 1807-ish. And for all the same reasons, they said, oh, no, we're not going to have a creed. We're not going to be another denomination. We're not going to do it. And then they did. And that's why we have the Church of Christ, Disciples of Christ, etc. I think just organization dictates that some formality has to come into play, because I think if they didn't, and I just think it's natural to think like that and to do that, because the effect if you don't is you're going to have so many independent bodies doing their own thing under no one's umbrella but their own, but yet having your name maybe on their building or a sign. That itself is going to be a conflict. I just think just out of just sheer necessity, you have to have your organization and you have to bring everybody under your umbrella.
And the vision or the statement that Ellen White made about where we have had years to prepare, you have only got months. I can't remember the exact quotation. You read it earlier. At what point did she have that other statement where she said, some in this very room will see Jesus return, others will be food for worms? Have you
Oh,
got that
yes,
reference near you there? Just,
I
I'm interested
do.
in what year was that, and can you read
That was,
out what she said?
yeah, that was 1856, and that was done at a conference in Battle Creek.
And again, just
And
for those that are watching, this is now between that 51 to 63 era, where they're still very much looking to a soon return. And so if you could just read that for us, that'd be great if you've got it
yeah,
there.
so for everybody watching and listening, my source is Spiritual Gifts, Volume 2, page 208. And that's where the paragraph, and I'm reading off the page now. It says this: a conference was held at Battle Creek in May 1856. And then we're going to go down the page, and I'm on page 208. So just down a couple more pages, and it says this, and I'm quoting now. At the conference, a very solemn vision was given me. I saw that some of those present would be food for worms, some subjects of the 7 last plagues, and some would be translated to heaven at the second coming of Christ without seeing death. Senior Bonfoy remarked to a sister as we left the meeting house, I feel impressed that I am one that will soon be food for worms. And then it says the conference closed Monday.
Yeah. See,
So a
what
very,
concern? Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, so it's a very short vision, and very clear, at least in my mind. It's when she says, again, I'm reading, some of those present would be food for worms, some subject of the 7 last plagues, and some would be translated to heaven at the second coming of Christ without seeing death. So
Yeah.
we've got 3 categories that she just clearly gave right there.
Yeah. And what concerns some people, and myself included, I would say, is that this is a vision she had. So there was a list going around the Adventist church. I'm pretty sure, if my memory serves me correctly, I have seen that list. I'm pretty sure my grandmother, who is now well and truly passed, had a copy of that. My memory is saying I've seen the list, and people would cross the names of the list as they died with a sense of, okay, there's only a few people living. I can't remember when
Right?
the last person on that list died, but I remember talking to my grandma about it, and she reflected on how sad people were feeling when that happened. I'm guessing it might have been the early 1900s at some
For
point.
some reason, I want to say it was Kellogg was the last one that died. And I'm sure somebody in this room knows that answer, definitely. I
Yeah,
want to say
yeah,
it's Kellogg. But what I do have, though, and I'm looking at here, is a January 22nd, 1931 Review and Herald.
right.
And in that magazine, and I'll just read from it. Here we go. Here's the quote. It's on page 24. So again, it's January 22nd, 1931, page 24. And it says this: about 1904, and then in brackets, 48 years after the meeting in 1856, as told to me by Brother Nelson at the General Conference in 1905, he and George Amadon were making a list of those who attended the meeting in Battle Creek in 1856. They went to see Sister White to ask her if she could remember any names that they had omitted. Brother Nelson told me she said, "What are you doing?" He replied, "I'm getting a list of those who attended the meeting." She asked, "What are you doing with it?" He replied, "I'm going to have copies of it printed and sent to all the people." She replied, "Then you stop right where you are. If they get that list, instead of working to push on the message, they'll be watching the review every week to see who is dead." So you're right. In 1931, they were making the list. They were looking
Yes.
because they knew that they had a prophecy that
Yes.
if you were at that conference, yeah, yeah. But for some reason, I want to say it was Kellogg who was the
Yeah.
last man.
There's
So,
people watching that are really good at digging up that information, so someone will write it in the comments
oh
for us.
yeah,
If it
yeah,
comes up,
yeah,
I'll share it on the screen.
yeah.
So what happens then? And because it was such a long period of time, um, there was really no pushback on that. However, what concerns me, as I said earlier, is this is a claim from God. So, as in, this is a message I received directly from heaven. She says that before the talk. So,
Correct.
what then happens? The only alternative, the only answer you can give to that is that, well, as you can tell, prophecies are conditional. What's your answer to an Adventist apologist when they say, "Well, it's conditional. It's a conditional prophecy. Certain things weren't met, and that's a given."
Yeah.
I think I've heard you say that. Well, if it's a given, you should say it in your sermon. God has shown me this. That if you continue to act correctly, some of you will see Him coming.
Right.
Is
Right.
that what you would say?
Yeah, I want to say it's a very common Seventh Day Adventist response that I get. The it what I call it's conditional response. I get it all the time. And I mean, and the only way to deal with any kind of text or response is let's just go look at the original text again. Let's just read it. I mean, if it's there, then true, it's there. Let's admit it. Yeah, maybe it's conditional, or maybe it's not. But just let's both of us be frank and honest, and let's just read the text. And those of you, that's one reason why I like the 1850 this 1856 vision. It's very short and it's very clear. And you're right, it doesn't even use the word if then it's completely absent. I mean, we have a very clear definition of three categories of individuals. You're either going to be food for worms, you're going to suffer the seven last plagues, or you're going to be translated to heaven when the Lord comes. And that's it. There are no other conditions. Now, I've had Seventh Day Adventists tell me, "Oh, that's a conditional prophecy," and I say, "Okay, well, fine. Show me where the condition is in those words. I mean,
Yes.
maybe I'm missing it, and so I just throw it back and I ask, and I mean, typically then at that point I usually don't get a response. But you're right. But that is always the not always, but most of the time that's the first response I get is, "Oh, well,
Yeah.
it's conditional." And then
Yeah.
okay, fine. Well, let's look at it and see if it truly is.
Yeah.
And that again, that's the benefit of using original literature. So you can say here we can look at it in the original book or the original magazine. There's the words. You and I aren't going to dispute those.
Yeah.
So let's look at those words.
As I mentioned earlier, we're kind of doing an overview today. I want to bring you back later and dig into things like the amalgamation of man and beast, the
Hmm.
dress code that what was it? That
Hmm. The
vision,
reform dress.
the reform dress. There's
Yes.
a bunch of things I want to get you back, and just we'll spend a whole episode just chatting on those things. But I'm
Yeah.
just doing a broad brush stroke of some periods of time and your thoughts on them. Um, I, I think James White must have died around 1881 from memory.
1881. Correct.
Um,
Yes.
and s- in some ways, that was a powerful loss to the cohesive nature of Adventism. I think he had
Hmm.
an ability to kind of pull a lot of things together. I think
I do
Canwright
too.
when did Canwright leave? He left a few times, but his final departure. In fact,
Yeah.
you'll be interested to know that Nancy Page. I don't know if you've heard of the book Canwright. I was Canwright's secretary.
I have the book. Nancy's been to my house
Oh,
here.
brilliant! Wow. Well, she's watching right now.
So, oh, excellent. Hi, Nancy. No, we've talked about Mr. Canwright and that book, et
Great.
cetera. Oh, yeah,
And
absolutely. And I
we'll
look
come
forward
back
to
and
seeing.
have, yeah,
Yes.
we'll come
I look
back
forward
at
to seeing
them.
Nancy in February. I'll be at the Adventist conference that they have in Loma Linda.
Yes. Peter Mashenko has just written, I'll just bring it up on the screen. Peter, I'm not sure why you seem to love the reform dress, but I'm sure you have a reason for your abiding interest in it.
There we go.
Thanks, Peter. I think I have an interest in that and others, but I'm interested in the visions that Ellen White had, that she speaks very clearly to, and
Mhm.
tries to get people to change and conform to the wishes of these visions. And then when they don't actually eventuate, in that case with the reform dress, it just
Right.
kind of disappears. She
It,
didn't
it
even
it did.
respond to it again for the rest of her life.
No, no. I think she just absolutely
Um,
she relented to the pushback that she
yeah,
was receiving from the ladies at that time on it,
yeah,
and I think she just eventually just said, "Okay, I surrender."
yeah.
Yeah.
So yes, Pete, that's one of the reasons why I do bring that up.
Right.
But so let's come to, like, I think Joseph Bates is well and truly gone now. James goes in 1881.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, Canwright's gone, and we come to 1888, where they have the famous Righteousness by Faith General Conference session. I think it's the General Conference. A very important date for Adventists, because both kind of there's kind of two theologies in Adventism really that stem from this date. There's those who are yearning to go back to that period of time within Adventism that seem to be very clear he's about to return. Everything
Mm-hmm.
added up in that first 7 years. And then later on, things fragmented and became a little bit more difficult to pin down. So we come to 1888. The more conservative Adventists claim it as a moment of triumph. The liberal progressives claim it as a moment of triumph. Ellen White opens up to the notion of righteousness by faith a little bit more. My take on it is that it's, yes, we haven't lifted up Jesus enough, and let's put Jesus front and center, and Jesus will help us through his working in our spirit and us letting go to him to be able to keep the commandments. So they kind of still
Right.
turn
Right.
it back to the law.
Right.
But I don't want to go too in depth into that conference, but I want to talk about that time period from 1888 right up to 1919. Ellen White's now passed, and these minutes of a very important meeting where all these issues that you and I have talked about, from
Yes.
plagiarism to the visions of certain things like the reform dress, amalgamation of man and beast, changes to the great controversy, were addressed in this very important meeting. Kellogg, I think, is out of the church by then as well. We've got Prescott, we've got A.G. Daniels at this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
The minutes to this meeting were lost until the early 70s, I believe 1976 maybe, I'm wanting to say. And they, I think, had an opportunity there in 1919 to bring out a less idolized Ellen White
They
and
did.
proceed into a more gregarious, accepting, gracist, divergent kind of Adventism. What are your thoughts on the 1919 conference? Maybe touch a little bit on the 1888,
Mm-hmm.
and tell us what kind of went wrong in perhaps both of those, potentially saving uh, moments of Adventist
Oh
history.
yeah. Um, Now I have the 1919 manuscript. It's on my to read list. I've got to read it. I haven't read it yet. I've read excerpts of it, and I completely understand what was taking place, and even some of the pages that I've read. It's just a fascinating, really read behind the scenes that you know personal talk, but amongst senior leaders of the time, just candidly admitting some things that I think just wouldn't be permitted today. The whole plagiarism issue was a huge topic in the 1919 conference, and um, I don't know, Peter, if you stumbled across a YouTube channel called Test the Prophet.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
okay,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
excellent work
I
on.
look, I highly recommend
Oh yes,
everyone go and check that. There's been
oh yes,
a new episode just was dropped, I
yes.
think
Number
in the
4.
last week.
Yeah,
Yes, number 4, and
yes,
they mention
yes,
SDAQ&A and play
yes.
an excerpt from one of our interviews. And
Okay,
I tell you what, I think it's one of the most profound series on that topic that I've heard. I mean,
oh
you
yeah,
can
without a doubt.
read The White Lie, and it's quite abrasive and
Right,
aggressive, and in
right,
some ways academically not necessarily. It's not written as a scholarly work, and then there's other works you can read. But boy, this person, and I think they're remaining quite secret. This person is just so thorough,
right.
articulate,
And
oh,
like you see
incredible.
what he does too. He shows you the original books, and
Yes,
especially when he puts them side by side. Um, Original material, and then he'll can color over them, and you can see it's just absolutely amazing. And you're right,
yeah,
and that was it. They knew that in 1919.
yes.
Of
And
course, Canwright brought it up before
yes.
that.
Oh, incredible.
Um,
Early days,
yeah.
yeah.
Oh yeah, very. Yeah. I don't know. I'm just gonna guess a number. 15, 20 years before that conference in 1919. There's
Yes.
Canwright. I think his book is dated 1898, if I'm not
Something
mistaken.
like that,
And
yeah.
but there's Canwright bringing it up.
Yeah,
But you're right. But it rears its head again in 1919.
yeah.
Now,
And what were you
my
gonna say
thought.
about you were gonna say something about the test of the prophets. I interrupted, sorry,
No, no. I just wanted to make sure that either I didn't know if you had seen it
yep,
or your audience. But I say in terms of plagiarism, I mean, and if you're interested in that and looking just at the evidence, there's nothing better because it is the evidence in original material. It's not
yeah.
like you said you're reading the White Lie and it's some book printed in the 1980s where no, no. This is you'll see the original books in his
Mm,
videos,
mm.
and it's absolutely astounding. I mean, it's the evidence doesn't get any clearer or
Yeah.
better.
And if someone's
So
watching,
anyway, back.
sorry, if someone's watching,
Oh,
just put the link in the comments and I'll just bring it
oh
up on
yeah.
the screen. Sorry, go ahead, James.
So back to like 1919. I think it was a pivotal conference, and it's astounding to me when I see a conference like that. When I see men in leadership um, questioning, the prophecies of visions of Ellen White, the plagiarism, the really the behind the organization talk that would just never be public, and you see them acknowledge it, and you see them struggle with it, and then it just flops. It really goes nowhere. And when I see things like that, and I see men in an organization like that, because it speaks to truth, integrity, and here's these men who realize that there's questions. I'll just stick with plagiarism. I mean, because Ellen White was going to get sued by Hoiston and Coinbee
Yes.
for just the amount of plagiarism, and so I think they had to work that out, and so the evidence was there even in those early days. But here's men placing their faith in the visions of their prophet, and and now they have evidence to say, well, some of these visions aren't true, but yet they remained in the church. They remained faithful men to the very end, and it seems like these topics just got dropped. They just let Seventh-day Adventism function with the beliefs that they had at that time and went forward with it. And so, I mean, of course, you and I will never know. We can't guess their motives for wanting to stay in a religion that they know has been proven false, but they stay anyway. Um, I mean, I've seen that, and again, it's just something I see. I think it's just human nature and character to a certain degree. Um, just a really quick story. I had a sort of I'll call him he was a high level person in the Jehovah's Witnesses. He used to write, and high level means you're writing articles in their Watchtower and Awake magazines. He's at my house. He's standing in front of my library, and I have lots of books written against and about Jehovah's Witnesses. And he's looking at them all, and he goes, "Oh, I got that one. I know about that." And finally, I just looked at him and I said, "You know this stuff." I said, "You know everything I know. You've seen how they change their books, how they change the dates of their prophecies. You know it's all false, but yet you stay in the religion. I said, I don't know why. I said, you're staying here for some reason. I don't know, but it's not the truth. It could be family, friends, work. I don't know.
Mm.
And I've seen this same thing like I did with my friend then. And that again, that's what came to mind. I'm reading parts of the 1919 report. I'm like, here we go again. It's
Mm.
just human nature
Mm.
replaying itself out. Why they stay, I don't know. But you're right, they knew.
Mm.
And I think a lot of Seventh Day Adventists are completely unaware of that 1919 report and its
Yeah.
candid comments. That's
Yeah.
definitely on my list of I'm going to read. I'm going to thoroughly read that report and
Yeah.
probably end up doing a series of videos on it
It's a
because it's
very
such a key
interesting read.
pivotal.
Oh,
Oh,
yes. Yeah.
period.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
It's
mean, you're right.
kind
The whole organization could have changed at that moment in an instant and
Yeah.
gone a completely different direction or fractured. I mean, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it actually could have changed, but it
And I
didn't.
think
Yeah.
that's why it was kept secret, because they were concerned. I think
Yeah.
A.G. Daniels in the actual minutes says that the people aren't ready for this. And there's
Yeah.
some suggestions there that he even, and I've just forgotten the guy's name, but he was kind of passing on a bit of a flame to someone that maybe Leroy Froome. I'm wanting to think. I might be,
Hmm.
and is it Leroy Froome? Someone will correct me, but he kind of passed on the baton or the baton to someone to say, look, when I'm dead and gone, the Adventist Church does need to hear this sort of stuff. And whoever I'm thinking of did write a book about it, I think in the 40s. Look, I'll have to check on that. People who are into it more than me can confirm or deny that. But the reason was, let's keep this a bit quiet because it'll disrupt and fragment the church.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I want to talk for a moment now of that period between 1919 to 1957 with questions on doctrine. But we've just had a couple of questions pop up I thought you might like to just have a quick look at.
Hmm.
We've got one here. What does James think of Kevin Morgan's response to the white lie? I'm not sure if you've
I
heard that
haven't
one.
seen it, honestly. Yeah, I haven't seen it. I mean, if anybody, I would think Test the Prophet would
Yeah.
probably, if he,
Yeah.
and I know he hasn't done a video on it, but I'm sure he would know.
Yeah, yeah. And there's the Testing the Prophet again
Yeah.
YouTube channel. Highly recommend people go and watch all four of the messages there. But the latest one is just uh, mind blowing.
Yeah. Outstanding.
As are all of your works, James. They're incredible. Someone else has written this. I don't know why names don't come up. I think because we're going live to YouTube as well. There must be some kind of privacy thing there. This person has written, I have the book, John Harvey Kellogg, MD, Richard W. Schwartz, PhD, Southern Publishing Association, 97. Must reread after today's topic. I'm not sure what book they're referring to. Maybe they can put that in the comments and I'll bring that up as well. Maybe that's the Kevin Morgan book. If they could bring
Okay.
it up to that, that'd be great. Um, Someone else has put, even today, some people know the truth about Ellen White, but
Hmm.
they stay.
Hmm.
And look,
Yeah.
that's an important thing. I mean, in my interviews, one of the most profound moments in the very first interview, and people can watch it, season 2, episode 1, and I asked Bill Johnson, and I play it in the first 30 seconds before the episode starts, so people can see this right off the bat. It'll only take them a minute. And I said, how confident are you that something supernatural happened in 1844? And he paused for 15, maybe 20 seconds, and then
Wow.
said, look, I can't really answer that. And later in the actual episode, he kind of digs into that a bit more. But I later said to him, so you feel like you can be an Adventist and not believe in 1844? And he said, yeah, no problems. So I think there's
Wow.
definitely a climate within Adventism that you can be an Adventist, go to your nice local church that just focuses on Jesus. He's very much, Bill Johnson, and good on him, he's very much involved with the
Hmm.
One
Hmm.
Project, which is an Adventist, almost a young people's kind of movement that um, I guess a lot of the leaders are now 40 and 50 years old, but it's been going for a number of years, and they focus on the one, Jesus. That's Jesus is all. And I think that's great if you can find those kind of places within the church that you don't have to deal with the controversy. But I think the truth matters. I think the seeds of your denomination, the accuracy of are they based on truth matters, I think, because subtly the doctrine of Adventism, as we'll chat further on about, seems to not really equate with the biblical gospel. Like it's demonstrably quite different in those early years.
Oh yeah.
That's got problems with it, as we've just mentioned with 1919, that they don't want to really make known to the public. We don't want to make it known to the public because it'll fracture the church. So we come up to 1957, and between 1919 and 1957, the Adventist Church is working on how do we perhaps bring the gospel more into our doctrines? How can we make ourselves more palatable to the general public, to the rest of the
Hmm.
evangelical movement? And we won't go deep into the questions on doctrine book at this stage. I would love to get you back for a full in-depth chat about it. And I think the authors of that book, the 3 or 4 men that were involved with that, were very genuine. I think they were seeing the opportunity of a more Reformation style Adventism perhaps emerging from their roots.
Hmm.
And so they got together with Walter Martin, who was about to release a book with Barnhouse Publishing, Donald Barnhouse, I think, about to release a book where they were going to be included with Jehovah's Witnesses, I think Christian Scientists, Mormons, in a
Right.
book about cults. Now, they
Yes.
get wind of this and they're like, whoa, we don't want to be seen as that. And they genuinely, these guys, the more liberal progressive Adventists, saw themselves as not aligning themselves to the earlier kind of traditional Adventist views. So we
Hmm.
then see this kind of release of this book that I think is hugely significant because it's the
Hmm.
first time in Adventist history that they are presenting themselves to the world as something that a lot of the Adventists, traditional Adventists, were like, whoa, that's not what we agree with. And from that point on, I see that as ground zero to Adventism's current tensions, where they are split. The two theologies are quite clearly defined. Yes, there's many factions of Adventism, but there's two pretty clear doctrines there. One is wanting to return to a more gospel-oriented, Luther's Reformation style Adventism. The other is wanting to return to those early years of Adventism that we have talked about. Can you share with us briefly your thoughts on the book Questions on Doctrine, the impact it had, how it came together? Just some of your thoughts, generally speaking, on that.
I'd again, that's one of the topics I want to do a video on.
Hugely
I
important.
think, oh yeah, no, it is. Just the idea, and I think it, like you said, the Adventists in the mid 1950s did not want to be labeled a cult, like Jehovah's Witnesses, etc. And so, to your audience and to you, when I'm dialoguing Seventh Day Adventists, I never call them a cult. I don't do that because this is what I say to them. I say, you and I may have our disagreements, um, and our disagreements are going to center primarily on two aspects: what is the gospel, and the person, nature, and work of Jesus Christ. That's what matters. I don't open up my Bible and see the word cult in there. It's not there. I see the word Christian, and I see how Christianity is defined. And again, I'm going to take it back to those 2 points. What is the gospel message to be preached, which makes our converts, and second, who's the person, nature, and work of Christ. So I see that cult word. It's just still today, even some of the chat rooms I'll go into on YouTube, I'll see others will use the word cult, and well, Seventh Day Adventist, you're a cult, and oh my gosh, I kind of laugh because I can see the Seventh Day Adventists flailing around the room. No, we're not a cult. We're not a cult. We're not a cult. And it's like, fine, at least personally with me, I don't even use it. I don't even go there. We're going to have much more pointed, serious conversations. But it did catch their attention at that time because nobody wants to be in a book labeled like that. And what I did see, and what I've noticed in my other literature in my library, because I've got quite a number of books written on religious groups and about that time. Um, I have to test this theory, but it's this. When Walter Martin did not include them as a cult in his Kingdom of the Cults book, or Kingdom of the series, actually, he wrote a bunch of books published individually, Kingdom of Cult series. Um, it it incensed a lot of other Christians who, at that time, then published books, their own kind of I want to say refutations of a series of religions. You know, we've got Christian Science, Mormonism, etc., and included Adventism in their suite of non-Christian religions. So I think when Walter Martin did that, that kicked off a reaction in the Christian community to say, no, 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 no. We got to highlight this group for these reasons. Investigated judgment would be one of them, and say, we know we got to highlight this because they have the atonement of Jesus Christ completely wrong in the investigative judgment. And so anyway, I've seen that Walter Martin reaction kick off a whole other series of pamphlets and books written to, in their mind, expose the Seventh-day Adventist doctrine. So yeah, so personally, I don't care to use the word cult, but I know what Walter Martin was trying to do. He's trying to identify non-Christian religions, and at that time, he's writing books about them. But the Seventh-day Adventist, and I watched that series, and boy, that's a highly recommended series, the John Ankerberg show. I think it was like
Yes.
5 of them. It's a
Amazing.
fantastic to watch because you're watching something that's taking place after Questions from Doctrine has been released, and now Walter Martin is being bombarded by all these Christians that I'm talking about right now, who release these other books and others, telling him, "No, Walter Martin, you got this wrong. They really believe this." And you can watch that series, and you can see Walter Martin visibly perturbed in some cases about some doctrines as he's engaging his Seventh-day Adventist counterpart there. So I think had he survived his cancer, which he did have at that time, I mean, everybody's, you know, you can't make an argument from silence, but everybody always tends to say they think he would have changed his mind. Who knows? But nonetheless, there's palpable tension in that room in that 5 series set about that. So, I think the question on doctrine is just, it's funny how it all of a sudden, just in terms of publishing, it's just kind of dropped out of sight.
Yes.
Only to be recently, I think in the last few years, to be republished again, and this time with extensive notes. And I purchased my copy off the Adventist Center website, and I got to go through this. I got to read these notes because you're right, it's an absolutely pivotal book, and you're right, and that's exactly what Seventh-day Adventists were doing between. I mean, it's a time of prosperity and time of unity. 1940s, 1950s, the United States was extraordinarily prosperous, and everything was growing. Adventism was growing. Having an Adventist neighbor was fine. I mean, they cut their lawn, they got great kids, and they're fine-looking people, right? And so they're right there. They're molding their public image, and that's what I think they really wanted to guard in the 1950s.
Yes. And it's interesting to note also that book did have an impact in increasing the numbers. The Adventist Church around 1957 had about 1 million members worldwide. By the time we come to 1984 with the John Ankerberg interview with Walter Martin and Bill Johnson, there's over 4 million Adventists. And I think a fertile soil was created by new members coming in thinking Adventism was the Adventism represented in the Questions on Doctrine book. And so people like Desford, Cottrell, a lot of the scholars within Adventism were embracing this book, embracing this new theology, and teaching it within the Adventist Church. And from 1957, a group of Adventists, and some of my American Adventist scholar friends and Adventist apologists like to say it's mainly an Australian movement, that we're the larrikins and rebels, but the facts clearly demonstrate that the movement against the new theology was very American and Australian based. In Australia, they were called the Concerned Brethren, and I think there's somewhere between 16 and 19 signees that wrote to the president at the time of the South Pacific Division, expressing their concerns at this new theology, expressing their concerns at Des Ford, his theology, and it's kind of that point, excuse me, where the dividing lines really struck deep. And as I said earlier, ground zero was kind of that late 50s, early 60s for these two groups to become warring factions. In the late 50s, the General Conference president was quite supportive of the new progressive kind of Adventist movement. But come the late 60s, I believe, we had Pearson, Elder Pearson, I think, was the GC president. People can correct me if I'm wrong. And he became more in line with the Concerned Brethren, the movement to bring Adventism back to its traditional roots. And so while you find in Australia people like Des Ford initially were quite supported, when Keith Parmenter became the president here in the South Pacific Division, his ear was grabbed by the Concerned Brethren, and changes became to come into play. And so by the time Des Ford is ousted in 1980, Glacier View being that moment of the line in the sand, we then enter an Adventism in the early 80s where hundreds of Adventist ministers excuse me, questioned which side of the line are you? And those that were more the Des Ford side, he became like a litmus test. They
Right.
were gone. And so Adventism, a huge rupture occurred within Adventism during that time. In the 90s, Jan Paulsen became the General Conference president. Oh, I just want to add that Neil Wilson became the president after Pearson, and he carried on the Pearson, let's get rid of these kind of righteous by faith guys, these new theology guys. So we come to the 90s. Jan Paulsen is back more wanting a divergent Adventism, more progressive, more inclusive of both sides. At that period of time, which I think was a good 10 years, a lot of people like myself felt quite encouraged about the direction of the church. This is actually moving in a positive direction. Things are changing. There's a lot of support for inclusiveness of both sides. Yes, we don't agree, but we can sit down and have lunch together. Come the introduction of Ted Wilson, who is the son of Neil Wilson, the president at the time of the Des Ford Glacier View era. He now resides wanting to re-implement that kind of vision of Adventism that his father believed in, that the early founders of Adventism kind of taught, and has now worked quite successfully in bringing the church back into control with a more conservative kind of focus. I've kind of given you a big overview there of a 30, 40-year period.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts on that post-Glacier View to the current Ted Wilson climate, where the compliance document has been implemented as policy? What are your thoughts on that big era of time, and the two dividing groups that grew out of questions on doctrine?
Yeah, and one thing I'm sure is this these two competing views, we are not going to see an end to them. I think it's just, again, it's going to be human nature, and I think we're going to see these views are going to be competing in terms of GC presidents, for the rest of our lives. But back to your point, I see it, and I see it in the literature. Back to that index that I referenced earlier, that I'm doing word searches and putting some, I'll just say, interesting quotes together on paper. One of the word searches I did was remnant church. And as I'm doing the remnant church, and I do this with all my quotes, I see this. It's fascinating. I can see a fervent, energetic view, usually in the early literature, 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s. By the time I get to the 1920s and 30s, things they slow down and tone it down. So when I did my search on remnant church, I want to say it was probably late late 80s, where before that, it's very clear in the literature. We are the remnant church, period. If you're not in the Seventh-day Adventist church, you are not in the remnant church, period. But in the late 80s, and I could find the quote if anybody wanted me to real quick. I search my index. But there was a shifting now where they're saying, well, there can be people in other churches who, when Jesus comes, they're not going to get the mark of the beast. They're not going to, etc. But, their salvation is ensured. I saw this whole opening and softening of what I saw to be early doctrines. And I see that kind of ebb and flow,
Yes.
like we mentioned earlier, even in the 27 beliefs or the 28 beliefs, and the view of Ellen White and inspiration and authority was there. Now it's not. So yeah, I see this all the time in the literature. I'm doing a word search right now. It's a huge word search because the word just shows up a gazillion times. Keep the commandments. And so, because I'm just asking myself, okay, what does keep the commandments mean to
Yes.
Seventh-day Adventists? What does that really mean?
Mm.
And I think now in my search, I'm up to the 30s, 40s. And what I noticed even doing that, it's the same thing. I get really clear, fervent answers in the beginning. And then all of a sudden, at one point, everything just drops off.
Yes.
And it kind of goes silent. And so it's, I saw that with that. I saw it with Remnant Church. I saw it with probation, and over and over and over. So, oh yeah, I totally see it. Now, what I see in the church today, and I'm running across this a lot. I run across a lot of Seventh-day Adventists who, like you said, want to go back to I'll just call it the James White era, the doctrine of the early Seventh-day Adventist. And with that doctrine, what they always mean by that when they talk to me is who Jesus is. Because the Jesus of Seventh-day Adventism, in the mid 1800s, is a completely different Jesus that than today, and what
Yes.
they have. And with that comes a lot of Seventh-day Adventists love the King James Version. So they're generally KJV only, and they want to go back to the pre-James White era. And I am seeing more and more of those kind of Adventists who then call the current GC, well, they succumbed to Babylon years ago, is what they'll say to me often. And we're the real Adventists now, even though we may be in the church, and they say they are. So I'm seeing more of that now. I don't know. It's just anecdote. I haven't done any, of course, official studies, but that's what I'm seeing too. I'm seeing that faction.
I think that's an accurate observation. And it's a very interesting climate within Adventism at the moment. And what happens next? The question is on everyone's lips, because next year, 2022, there'll be voting in of a new president. Will someone like Ted Wilson remain? Will they be ousted? Will a more progressive Adventist come back into play? My theory is that a Ted Wilson or Ted Wilson himself will be reinstated, and that this divide will continue, but even more starkly.
You're right. Nobody's going to be happy.
Yeah.
Because even if a much more liberal Adventist, let's just say, takes the leadership role, well, then your conservatives are just going to have a fit. Or vice versa. If a very conservative takes leadership role, right, your liberal Adventists that's not going to sit well with them. I mean, no one's going to be happy ultimately. I guess it's just going to depend on to what degree this new leadership wants to push their agenda or position. And I'm sure they're sensitive to the political climate within Adventism. And, they know what we know, the spectrum and scale of Adventist belief, from the extraordinarily conservative to the liberal Adventist. And so maybe they'll try to walk that line in between. But it will be an interesting thing to watch.
Yeah. and both sides are very positive that the outcome will lend itself to their view.
Right, right.
I'm less, I would have been considered a liberal progressive Adventist myself when I was one, but I'm not as positive as my liberal progressive Adventists are in that. But I hope that it does turn out for the best for them. You were mentioning earlier about the remnant church vibe, and I know when I was about 7 or 8 as a young Adventist boy, late 60s, early 70s, there was definitely a strong push from all pastors, the church, people around you, that we were part of something very special. We were the chosen people bringing a new message to the rest of the world. There was very much an us and them. It was very positive. It wasn't a scary message. The message of probation was scary. My generation had a lot of fear associated with the close of probation. Our time could come up any minute. After that, no matter what we did, wouldn't give us a chance for heaven. It would have been already a done deal. But it's interesting when I share that story of my upbringing, which is pretty much every baby buster and baby boomer and the older generations above us. That was their experience, and the Sabbath had to be kept. There was some very defined things that were unwritten rules of how to keep the Sabbath. However, if you talk to the millennials and younger, that Adventism is not their experience. Now, there is a very conservative movement of young Adventists that are taking it back to the era of my Adventism, and they're very successfully doing so. However, the average American, Australian, European young Adventist, the Sabbath stuff's not the big issue of salvation. The remnant, no, people are going to be saved. It doesn't matter. And so they kind of say to me, well, you should just be quiet because, this is not our experience. What are your thoughts on that? Should someone like me go, well, should I be quiet because this was my experience? It's not your experience, but it's still important for you guys to know about it. Or should I be saying, don't even worry about it, it'll work
Right,
out, and just shut up?
right. And I do hear that a lot from a lot of I want to say liberal progressive Adventists who will tell me, who will write to me and say, you know what, you're just getting all spun up about all this old Ellen White books and quotes, and they say I've been an Adventist for 10 years and I don't even own an Ellen White book, never read an Ellen White book. My pastor doesn't even use that name from the pulpit.
Great. That's what I'm
You
speaking
know,
to. Yeah.
yeah, and I hear that all the time. And what I do, again, I mean, I am to a certain degree like a broken record. Just it's the same message over and over. Who is your Jesus and what is your gospel? And I'll ask them usually. I mean, when I hear that, and I'll say, okay, I'll say, what's the gospel message of Seventh-day Adventism? Well, that's the three angels' messages, Revelation 14, 6 through 12. Oh, okay. And then we'll talk about that, or we'll talk about the investigative judgment. I'll say, well, do you know where that came from? How it came into being? I mean, it's really came into being by two visions, Hiram Edson, and then it was confirmed by Ellen White just a couple of years later. I said, so you may not have ever read an Ellen White book. You and I may have talked more about Ellen White with each other than you heard in the last 10 years of your church. I said, but you really are a believer in Ellen White, and you really are a follower of Ellen White if you follow the doctrines of the church. And then what I often do is, I'll say, here's your 28 beliefs book. Do you believe this? Because here's this book here, which is the latest church manual, which has the baptismal vows, which says before the baptismal vows, you have to confess a belief in this belief system, these belief books. So if you believe in those, then you really are a follower of Ellen White. You may have never heard her name, and I'm not going to dispute that. I agree with you. You probably haven't, but you are in effect an Ellen White disciple and following her doctrines as expressed, at least investigative judgment, etc. in this book. So yeah, I run into them all the time, and they'll say that, and then I'll just ask questions about their belief. And I'd say, well, if you took your baptismal vows, one of your baptismal vows is to have the belief in the spirit of prophecy,
Yes.
which happens to be a chapter in the 28 Beliefs book, which happens to be Ellen White.
Yeah.
So I understand what you're saying. And, it almost gives them a comfort to one degree to say, we're not like those guys.
Yes.
We're much more open and accepting. But I say, when it really comes down to it, you're not all that far apart.
And I think they're also saying that if you stop talking about it, it would eventually become the warm, fuzzy Adventism that I believe in.
Yeah, yeah,
Whereas in my experience of kind of having that exact attitude, it hasn't changed for 40 years. There was hope of it changing. There was pockets of it that had seemed to have changed. But here I am 40 years later and going, well, I think there's concern there because I don't think if we're silent that actually that change is coming.
right,
And I think too that what concerns me, you might have the happy clappy love Jesus worship focusing Adventism in your local church, but what happens when you bring someone into the church and they stumble across books like The Great Controversy? Ted Wilson is about to print 1 billion
that's
copies
right. I saw
of
that.
The Great Controversy and give
Mm-hmm.
away.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of climate are you bringing people in? That concerns me. So I
Yeah,
think, yeah, look, if you're an Adventist and you've got a great location and it's not an issue, cool, great, enjoy your Adventism, but maybe telling us to shut up about it isn't a very well advised
right,
thing to do
right,
because
right.
there are concerns there.
Yeah, yeah. So my approach with them, again, I'm coming from a completely different perspective, right?
Yeah,
I'm coming from, a person who's never been an Adventist. Um, I still I got to do this someday. There's a local Adventist church by me. I've already scattered out. I'm gonna go visit. I'm just gonna pop in one day and just be quiet. I'm just gonna sit and observe. And so I do that with all the religions that I study. I've been to Mormon temples. I've been to Islamic mosques. I've been to Jehovah's Witness Kingdom halls, etc. I haven't been to Adventist church yet. So I'm gonna do that and pop in there. But so I'm coming to this from a completely different perspective.
yeah,
And my perspective is, it's the truth of God's word, and is what you're teaching, whether you're, a really happy liberal Adventist or a very staunch conservative Adventist living in a town with a population of 100, living in the woods, whatever the difference, it doesn't. What are your doctrines? And again, I'll go back to those 2 points. What's your
mm,
gospel message that you preach? How do you know what it is? I mean, drive me to your literary source for it, because this is something else I tell people that I dialogue with. I'm not really frankly concerned with, and I don't mean this in a bad way, I'm not concerned with what you believe, because what you believe may not be in accord with your church doctrine. I mean, I run into Catholics all the time who give me all manner of answers, and I said, that's wonderful, but what does your Catholic catechism teach? That's what I'm interested in. And that's what we should talk about. That's what you should be interested in.
mm,
Well, then I say, well, here's your 28 beliefs book. That's what we should be interested in.
yeah,
So again, I mean, so whether you're a conservative or liberal, I approach it from the same, especially when I deal with them. I say, what is the gospel and who is Jesus Christ? What did he do on the cross? What
yeah,
does the book say? The book being the Bible, and I'll juxtapose that to the 28 beliefs, and that's what we can talk about.
mm,
So you're right. We don't have to talk about Ellen White all the time, and often I don't. I may use her as a lead sometimes into having a biblical conversation, but you're right. So yeah, and when I do run into those Adventists, and I do, that's exactly what I do. And I had a good friend look at the church website that I'm going to go visit. And he says, "Oh yeah, you're probably going to a somewhat liberal church." From looking at the pictures of the instruments that are used that are on the stage, the dress of the individuals, and etc. And I said, okay, well, it's good to know. I'll just pop in sometime. So yeah, I'll probably be visiting a liberal Adventist church here
mm,
soon.
mm. It's ironic, isn't it, that the Adventist claim, even in that early James White era, was that we are restating and recovering the Reformation.
Oh,
for the
yeah.
world. And the irony is that then for the next, uh, you know, well, right up until the attempt for that to actually happen in 1957, there is no real sign of the Reformation that Luther talked about evident in any of the doctrines.
Right, right, right. And I'm getting ready. I was working on a video today. Walter Veith just released a 5 video series called The Earth, and he's called it a documentary, The Three Angel Messages. I went through the first one today, and yeah, you're right. In that video, it's precisely as he's kind of laying out before he gets up to his definition of the three angels messages in this first video, which is why I'm making my video, because it's completely unique. Um, yeah, he says that same thing. So you're right. Even the what I term celebrity Adventist, Doug Batchelor, Walter Veith, Mark Finley, the celebrity Adventists. Yeah, they all say that same thing.
Um, there's a project I'm working on, this little side project that I'll give a quick plug for, that kind of grew out of an interview I did with John Rosier, who's been a semi-regular guest in some of the platforms that I'm involved with. And he, I think in the 80s, wrote a kind of a what Adventist could have been kind of
Hmm.
manuscript, I guess. And so he and myself and a few others are putting together a platform that's called Reformation Adventist, and it's called What Could Have Been, What Could Be. And in it, he tries to link the Adventism that did actually connect to the Reformation and what it might have looked like. So
Right.
those that are watching that might want to try and dig that out and find it and join up. And we're about to put a series of programs together that imagine what could have been, what could be. We'll end in a minute, but I'd love to get you back. I really would love to dig deep next time into some specific areas that we've talked about.
Hmm.
Peter Mashenko, who raised earlier that I often return to the reform dress.
Right.
He's a very smart guy and has got some really good questions. I'll just put one up that he has asked you. It's such a big question, um,
Yes.
and I guess it's one that we may leave for another time. But if you could give a quick 2-minute answer, he's asked, could James explain what he sees as the difference between the biblical and SDA understanding on who Jesus is and what the gospel is? And it's a very
Yeah.
good question. It's the core of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And thanks, Peter. It's a really good question, and it's one I
Absolutely.
definitely
And
want to
and you're
dig
right.
into. It's the
This would
heart of what
be
we've talked about.
Oh, totally. This would be a great future topic. And
Yes.
I've done a number of videos on both of these topics because to me I'm intently interested in both of them. So the gospel. The gospel message in Seventh-day Adventism. And I remember when I was first studying this a couple of years ago, because there's something I know about studying religions. When I was studying all the ones I've already mentioned, Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, Christadelphians, Christian Science, etc., if they're going to err from the biblical framework, they're going to err in the gospel and who Jesus is. So when I started studying Adventism, then that's when I found out, well, the gospel message of Seventh-day Adventism is the three angels' messages of Revelation 14, 6 through 12. And they key off the word everlasting gospel in Seventh-day Adventism. And so when I talk to a Seventh-day Adventist, I say, what is your gospel message? They'll say, well, go read Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 through 12. There's our gospel message. And then I'll say, but is that really, I go, I'm really, what are the messages of the three angels? Because they have messages. What are the messages? Because they're not in Revelation 14, 6 through 12. They're not there. Where are they? I can go to these two sources. I use the Discipleship Handbook a lot, written and published by the GC, and the 28 Beliefs book. And in there, I can find the messages for the three angels. Jesus is, transferred apartments in 1844, begins to work investigative judgment, Babylon, get out of her, apostate churches, etc. And I say, so problem one is the messages, the gospel messages, specifically the three angels, are not in the Bible. They're in Adventist literature, but they're not in the Bible. That is not the Bible gospel message. The Bible gospel message is 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 4. It's the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ. The Apostle Paul received that message divinely from the resurrected Christ himself in Galatians chapter 1. So that's the gospel. And in Galatians chapter 1, he also says to preach another gospel other than the one that he received and preached is to be cursed. So that's why it's intently important for the Adventists, in my mind, to say, your gospel message is not in accordance with the biblical gospel message. And I have quotes in my Review and Herald magazines which essentially state that nobody preached this gospel message before 1844. So it's new. So in a nutshell, that's the different gospel. The different Jesus is, we can look at, I think it's chapter 24 in the 28 Beliefs book about the sanctuary. And when Jesus when the when 1844 investigative judgment started, Jesus in this investigative judgment is atoning for sins. Finally, I mean, in terms of finality, I say, well, wait a second. John 19:30, when Jesus is on the cross, his last words were, "It is finished."
Yes.
I mean, his atonement was finished. He had paid the debt of sins at that time. But in Adventism, and Ellen White wrote this in Patriarchs and Prophets, followed by Uriah Smith in another book that I have, they clearly state Jesus did not die on the cross for sinners.
Mm.
That was to be accomplished in the work of the investigative judgment. So Jesus in Adventism has a two-phased atonement that is completed in the heavenly sanctuary. And I'm always reminded of Hebrews 9:22. It says, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sins. So I often say, well, the Jesus in the investigative judgment in heaven is not shedding blood to forgive sins, but yet Hebrews 9:22 says you got to do that.
Yeah.
So those are really two big issues.
Yeah.
And the whole Jesus being dressed as the Levitical priest that you see
Yeah.
in Adventist literature, etc., all goes along with that. So yeah, I thank the gentleman for asking that question, because that's a big deal,
Yeah.
and that's something that I engage with all the time. I've got many videos on both those topics.
I think the same writer just said people at camp meeting, and I think that's a recent camp meeting here in North New South Wales,
Okay,
said that no one had the real gospel message before 1844.
that's an accurate statement from the
Yeah,
Review and Herald too. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And what's interesting about that is, yes, I would agree. If Jesus had returned in 1851, the whole Adventist message made a kind of sense. Here's the tack on bit. He's nearly coming back. Get ready. He'll
Hmm.
be here soon.
Hmm.
You could kind of make it all kind of a cohesive theology there. But if you extrapolate that over time, you do have to say, well, if this is now the theology that is the accurate one over the last 170 plus years, what happened before 1844 and after the cross wasn't the real gospel. You can't
Right,
claim it to have been. So what happened to those
right,
people? Were they
right,
never grasping the gospel? Did Luther
right,
not grasp the gospel?
right. Well, then you have present truth,
Mm,
which means what? There's always a message present, applicable for the time period in which, you know, which is then also what I hear.
yes,
Yeah, I see this quote here about the shaking. I have that book and I haven't read it yet, but
it
I
is.
do have it.
Yeah, I've just read it again for about the fourth time in the last week or two,
Yeah.
and I've seen it through new eyes because I hadn't read it for maybe 5 years before that. And wow, I highly recommend you read that, because
Okay. Okay. All
you'll
right.
really start to get the
I'll move that
idea.
up my list. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
you'll get this idea of the two theologies within Adventism that
Mm.
Paxton
Mm-hmm.
observed in the 70s and spoke to very well.
All right.
Someone has just asked also, not sure where to find it, but the John Rosier Reformation Project you mentioned sounds quite fascinating. Love to hear more. And so I just wrote up, if people want to search Reformation Adventist on Facebook, you'll come across the group. It literally is a project that's about to begin and only has about 4 members at this stage.
All right.
But it's going to look at what Adventists could have been and what could be, maybe. It's just an interesting kind of platform to have a lot of guest speakers sharing their thoughts on that. Before we say farewell, we were chatting earlier about Ted Wilson becoming potentially a president again. Ted Wilson is 71 years of age. Is there a cutoff age limit to the new president? And
Yeah.
the answer is no mandatory retirement age
Right.
for that. I think he will be back in, or it'll be someone of his. And look, to be honest, I think he's being genuine and upfront. I think he's saying what he wants to see happen, and people are saying, "Great, thanks for making it clear. We follow
Hmm.
you, or we don't." I think
Hmm.
the liberal progressive Adventist is not really clear at all what's going on or what they want or don't want, and a lot of the ones that do have a voice keep it quiet because they're worried about losing their jobs.
Right.
So I'm just doing a quick scan of the questions. Oh, hey, Joe. Very interesting discussion. Thank you. And I think someone may have listed your channel there too, which I've been bringing up regularly also. Just checking quickly if there's anything else to add. But look, I've really enjoyed this conversation today, and I'm very much.
Absolutely.
Let's get you back after Christmas, and we might be able to make that gospel discussion one of the first ones we talk about.
That'd be a great
Uh,
one.
in a couple of weeks, I'm interviewing some would say a very conservative fundamental Adventist, and he and I have done an interview in season 1 actually already. He's 89 as well, very
Mm.
very clever and articulate still. His mind's fully switched
Mhm.
on, and he talks a lot about the nature of Christ being changed in questions on doctrine, and
Okay. Yep.
I think that's something you and I can explore a little bit more as
Absolutely.
well.
Yeah.
So someone has said, looking forward to more chats with James. That's great.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So, any final words you'd like to share before we say farewell?
No, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to finally meet you and chat with you and your whole group here. So thank you for that.
Thank you, and thanks so much for being part of the show. Those that are watching, if you're enjoying the content, there's my tip jar over at PayPal. Would love a little bit of support there financially, particularly as I'm a musician and we've kind of been in lockdown for 2 years, and I've had 4 gigs, I think, in 2 years. So
Mm.
any support would be well received. At the very least, I'd encourage everyone to please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'd love to build the audience there. And don't forget, you can find out more about James and the Apologia. How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, that you
Apologia?
said it
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
And in fact, they don't need to write down the link. Just literally go to YouTube and type in Academy Apologia as one word, and
Right.
up it'll come. And there's some fascinating interviews there.
Right. And just so your people know too, I mean, why I don't use my name on my website is because I spend a lot of time dialoguing Muslims, and I get death threats every once in a while when I do that. And well, most of them I know aren't real. Some of them I think are. So um, that's why. And that's when I started the channel. That's what I was doing.
And the good news is that I don't think you would get death threats from the average Adventist.
No, I'm not worried about Adventist or Jehovah Witnesses or no, you're right, not at all.
Hey, James, thank you so much.
Hey,
Thank you,
thank
everyone,
you,
for watching, and look forward to catching you all again soon.
and have a